not the quantity, it's the quality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Mulk, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتِ. Allah did not create, He said, I created the entire life, not because of how many deeds you do, but because of the quality. To find out who does the better deeds. And this is why one day the Prophet, just to give an example of this one, the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet Muhammad, he had some guests come to his house, or he had some guests come into the city. And the Prophet ﷺ lived a very simple life, that he would go days and there's nothing in his house except for water and some dates. So in the masjid, after Isha, he said, who amongst you is willing to take and host the guest of the Prophet? So one of the Sahaba, he raised his hand. I am more than happy in this and that to take, to host the guest of the Prophet ﷺ in my house today. And so he hosted the guest. And you know one thing? The man that raised his hand was one of the poorest family in all of Al-Medina. Yet he raised his hand and he went into his wife at the house and he said, do we have any food for this person, for this guest? And she said, very little food. He said, okay, why don't you make the kids sleep without dinner tonight? Very little food, very dry food, very little food. He said, make the kids sleep without any dinner tonight, and I'll get the guest in. And when he comes in, I'm going to blow the curtain off so that he doesn't see anything, so the light is off. And you and me, we're going to act as if we're eating. He doesn't know how much food there is. So he said, we're going to act as if we're eating and chewing and this and that, while he eats all of the food. Imagine, they want to show their kindness, and they want to give, and they want to help so much and host this guest, to the point that the kids are sleeping hungry, and we're going to sleep hungry, and we're going to make him feel so comfortable that we're going to act as if we're eating, and it's so dark he's not going to see us, and he's going to eat. And he went for Salat al-Fajr. And the Prophet ﷺ says, قَدْ عَجِبَ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadith is Sahih, Sahih Bukhari, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala عَجِب min صَنِيعُكُمْ الْبَارِحَةِ. Allah was amazed by what you did yesterday. He was so pleased and amazed by what you did last night. And that is why Allah revealed a verse in the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ, and the ones that don't fight except for the little that they have, and yet they're willing to share it. And that verse is in Surah Al-Bara'ah for two reasons, and that is one of the reasons that was revealed for it. Imagine that they're willing to give, even at that point of poverty. And that is the attitude that we as Muslims need to have. Okay. Now that you've went through this process and you're coming to the masjid and you've met brothers and sisters and you've been the temptation, you had the taqwa and you're this and that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to put you in a position of what? Of imara. Of imama, of leadership. Leadership here does not mean, a lot of people say when the hadith says Imam Adil. Imam Adil does not necessarily mean the president or the judge. Ideally, that is what it is. But it also means a number of things. As in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٍ مِّن رَعِيَّتِهِ. All of you is a ra'i, all of you is a leader, and all of you is in charge of what you're leading. And he gives an example with the husband. The husband is in charge of what? Of his family. So now the ideal meaning of the hadith is yes, the president and the judges, but that attitude also continues to what? To each and every one of us. The husband in your own house. The father and the mother to the children. You are a manager at work and you have people that work for you, that report to you. You in your business and the dealings that you're dealing with. You are in a committee in the masjid or in any organization and you're in charge of dealing with things. And he says what? Imamun Adil. Again, since none of us are in the upper parts of it, we're going to talk about our part of it. That you're going to be in an area where you need to make a decision in which what? Your friend is wrong. And the person that you hate is right. Imamun Adil. Imam Adil is a very tricky role. Imam Adil means what? That you're going to be in a position that the person that you love and you support, and he loves you and supports you and whatever, is wrong. And the person that you dislike is right. How are you going to deal in that situation? Imam Adil is not an easy word. It is so easy to throw out, it's so easy to say and whatever, but when it comes times to make that judgment, to make that decision, and there's someone that is from my country and someone that is not from my country, someone that speaks my language but someone that doesn't speak my language, but he's my cousin, but he's my this and that person is not this and that, the decisions become very hard, they become very difficult. Now when we're talking, we say, yes, Imam Ali, we're going to make the decision, we're going to be fair, and Muslims were fair. But when it comes to real life, when you are talking against my son, how dare you say this about my son? And how you did it at that moment when it's personal? To become adil is where Allah rewards that greatness. And that is the attitudes of adl. Inna Allah ya'mur bil adl. Allah commands you to always be on the side of what? Of justice. And that is an attitude that we as Muslims need to have. Is to have that just attitude. To make a judgment regardless of who's on our side and who's against us. And not to think twice about it. You know, one time, sometimes people have a hobby. They just do things for whatever reason. And that is why one of the wealthiest women in Medina, you know what her hobby was? It's to steal. She's from a very rich and wealthy family, and yet she enjoyed stealing. That's it, just steal. She sees something she likes, she just steals it. It's just so systematic. Some people are just like that. They just like to pick things for whatever reason. And now the Prophet ﷺ said, now that it reached him and he's the Imam, he has to make the decision. He said, we're going to do this. She's from a wealthy family that gives sadaqah and gives zakah and this, and now he's going to judge against their daughter. This is not an easy decision, but the Prophet ﷺ said, that's the decision of Allah, we're going to do it. Regardless of how rich, how poor, how this, how that, it doesn't make a difference. Justice is justice. And then they came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, she's from a rich and wealthy family. They give so much to us, and they do this, and they support, and you know, we need their money, we need that. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? لو سرقت فاطمة. If Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, was to steal, Muhammad will take the command of Allah on his daughter. There's no justice, there's no way around in it. And this is the attitude that we as Muslims need to develop. Is that it doesn't matter if the person is from my country or not, or my cousin, or this. The command of Allah is the command of Allah. There's no area, there's no, they say, gray areas. And we have to have that attitude. And now we come to the final point of it. Because I think there was about 3 minutes for Isha, so we'll try and wrap it up here very quickly. The third one of it is رَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا. A person that mentions Allah all in seclusion, that he cries and in tears from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that we need to develop in our hearts. Not only in public, but we sit with ourselves, all by ourselves, remember Allah to the point that we start to cry. And this is something that we've been deprived with. We care so much about this world and about money and about this and that we forget where we're going to go to. We have to remember, and the Imam subhanAllah repeated it twice as if it's a hint to add it into this point here. يَوْمَ تُبْلَى السَّرَائِرُ, the day in which all of our secrets are going to be revealed. We have to remember that day. And remember, in that day, the Prophet ﷺ says, عَيْنَانْ لَا تَمَسُّهُمَا النَّارُ. There are two eyes that will never be touched by the hellfire. You know which one it is? One of them is the eye that teared from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So make your eye tear from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that the hellfire never touches it. Remember what you did wrong and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Remember the opportunities and the blessings that Allah has given us, and we have missed out on them. You know, Imam Ahmad was sitting in the masjid, and then an old man walked in. He's never seen this old man before as he's giving his lecture and talk, and he just wanted to welcome that old man. He wanted to, entertain that old man. And so he asked the old man, he said, because usually people, Arabs at that age, especially back then, they memorize a lot of poetry. So he wanted to entertain him and said, مَا تَحْفَظْ مِنَ الشَّعْرِ يَا أَخَ الْعَرَبِ. How much poetry do you know? And he said, لَا أَحْفَظْ إِلَّا بَيْتًا وَاحِدًا. I only know one verse of poetry. Imam Ahmad said, say it. Yeah, at this age you're supposed to know so much, but if you only know one, it must be something that's very powerful, very amazing. He said, say it. He said, يَقُولُ الشَّاعِرِ يَا أَحْمَدِ. The poet says, إِذَا مَا خَلَوْتَ الدَّهْرَ يَوْمًا فَلَا تَقُلْ خَلَوْتَ ولكن قل علي رقيب ولا تحسبن الله يغفر لحظة ولا أن ما يخفى عنه يغيب. Ahmed, the poet says, do not ever say, if you are all by yourself, that I have been secluded and there is no eye looking at me. And remember, if no eye is looking at you, no human eye is looking at you, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always over you looking at you. Imam Ahmed immediately secluded and left everybody, and he went to his house and he went to his room. And his students heard him crying. and repeating over and over. If you seclude